Well, hey, let's go ahead and get started. I am with Dean Emeritus and Professor of Music, Professor Donald E. McGlothlin, and I am Paul Ortiz, formerly director of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. It is August 20th, 2024. At the Proctor program, we've initiated, under Dean Lavelli's leadership, a series of interviews talking to leaders, current and emeritus leaders of the College of the Arts. As Lucinda corrected me last week, I said College of Arts, and she said College of the Arts at the University of Florida, because there is a very important history. There wasn't always a College of the Arts at the University of Florida, and a lot of universities don't have College of Arts, and so we're trying to understand the importance of such a college, the importance of the arts especially. Don, maybe one place to start, Lucinda emphasized with us the importance of the Creative Campus initiative. And I think the both of you shared with us a lot of documentation about that Creative Campus initiative. Is that a good place to start?
I think that's an excellent place because we both believe passionately in that concept. And I had the privilege of sort of planting that seed, and then Linda took the ball, if you will, and ran with it, and it's become an important part of the University of Florida as an institution and culturally also. So what would you like to talk about regarding that?
Well, when people think about the University of Florida, a lot of things come to mind. And I think, certainly, there's more of an academic emphasis really in the past, few decades, obviously sports. But oftentimes people don't think of the arts. And when I was reading the proposal in its inception, it seemed that what you're saying is we need to make the arts a centerpiece of what we do at the University of Florida, and not just at the University of Florida, but in the broader society. Is that a fair assessment?
It absolutely is. And I think your statement about the arts not always being an important part of a university is absolutely right on. I had the privilege of coming to the University of Florida the first time in 1972-73. I was appointed chair of the Department of Music at that time. And the University of Florida is, as you well know, a land grant university. And I think the institution, although it was a frustration for me and my job, the university was appropriately deciding at that time that strategically to move its ahead in a progress toward excellence and national and international visibility, they would emphasize the historic strengths of a land-grant university. That is to say, agriculture, engineering, business, medicine, which of course, interestingly, at least in those days, were male professions primarily. The corresponding institution, as again I think you know, was called the Women's Seminary of Florida, which was kind of a name given to women's colleges in the southern part of the United States. It's now at Florida State University. And again, as you might expect, the arts flourished first there because of the connection with women, at least as it was defined in those days. So one of my first challenges in 1973 was to work with the other people in the other arts disciplines to see if we couldn't begin to move the arts sort of to the central part of the mission of the institution. And one of the most important things that happened was in 1975. At that time, the college, it had gone through a long evolution, as you referenced, but it was then known as the College of Architecture and Fine Arts. And there was a move on the part of architecture and building construction to create two separate colleges. They believed, I think, that the arts, at least this was their argument, that the arts presented a hindrance or a shackle on their ability to fully develop. And the upper administration agreed with them. And those of us in the arts got together and we all agreed then to go our separate ways. So the College of Fine Arts as a separate academic institution or program dates from 1975. So we're quickly approaching the 50th anniversary of that. A gentleman named Joseph Stabatella, who was an art professor, was named the founding dean. And the program really, I'm hesitant to say this, but I believe it was almost starved initially. I think there were people in Tigard Hall betting that the Fine Arts College would not survive and would be absorbed over into the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. But we all worked very hard to prevent that from happening. But Joe had virtually no budget. He had one secretary, and that was it. And the different departments, the Department of Art, the Department of Music, and the new Department of Theater, which was pulled over, the program was pulled over from Arts and Sciences, each had a chair and very little resources. So when I was recruited by the University of Missouri to come there and be the head of their music school, I decided to go because I didn't see that we were getting very far here. And it was a chance, it was a lateral move professionally, but it was a chance for us to go back home, if you will, to the Midwest, and our boys grew up as their grandparents and so on. So when I was invited to come back as dean in 1990, I met with the new president, John Lombardi, whose name you know, I'm sure. And I asked the question that you asked earlier. I said, President Lombardi, what's your philosophy about the role of the arts in the University of Florida? And Lombardi spoke eloquently and passionately about his view that the arts should be central to the mission of the University of Florida, that they should permeate the life of the institution, that they should achieve the same levels of excellence as the historic program, law, engineering, and so forth. And that I, as dean, should be at the table for every important conversation. So I said, I'll come, because that was the message I was looking for. And that references back to your question about where were the arts and where are they now in the life of the institution.
Excellent. So, Don, could you elaborate a little further on President Lombardi's, because again, this is something I've read a lot about him. I've heard other, of our colleagues talk about him, but I've never heard this perspective on him vis-a-vis the arts.
Well, he was a brilliant, brilliant man, I thought. He had come to us from Johns Hopkins, I think. And he was particularly personally interested in the arts. He was a clarinetist. He would march with the alumni marching band at homecoming every year. And his daughter, Mary Ann Lombardi, was a theater major at the University of Michigan. His son, John Jr., was a clarinet player also. So there was a personal experience that he was drawing on. When he had been, I hope I'm saying this right, at Johns Hopkins, the Peabody Conservatory of Music was part of that institution. So he had had that experience as well. He was very supportive. He could be very sharp-tongued. I remember, this is another story we may want to get into, when the Performing Arts Center opened and it became part of my college and I was responsible for it. Lombardi said, Don, I want you to take this on if you want to, but I want it to, be excellent like everything else in the university. But if you allow a deficit to occur, I will personally come out there and nail the plywood over the doors. And when I asked him why he felt that way about it, he said, well, before I came here and I had to deal with the Peabody Conservatory of Music, which by the way is the oldest one in the United States, he said they were constantly running out of money. And I got so tired of dealing with that, I decided if I came to Florida, I was never going to deal with that again.
Wow. So, Don, can you talk about, there's a lot of really talented people who become, instructors or professors or great teachers of the arts in all different fields. But a much smaller number of those end up to be, leaders of the arts. And that's one of the things that I think in this series of interviews we're trying to get at. So I wonder if you could take a step backwards and thinking, in your own, you have a distinguished career as a performer, as a person who has taught this craft. Can you talk about maybe a little bit about your background now that we have your CV, obviously, but what is it? What were some of the important steps for you as a person kind of immersed in the arts that led you, first of all, into the arts and then led you to become a teacher of the arts?
Well, first of all, getting into it. I grew up in a coal mining town in Pittsburgh, Kansas, down in the southeast corner of the state. And they had, as many towns across the country had in those days, a normal school, which became a teacher's college. I started playing the clarinet when I was in the 5th grade, like a lot of kids do, school band kid. I had some talent, I guess, and so my folks arranged for me to take lessons with a clarinet professor at the local college. He was incredible. And but I'm also a Sputnik kid. In other words, I'm part of the Sputnik generation. So in about 1953 or so, when Sputnik went up, I'm in high school, and suddenly everyone, especially the boys, if they had any intelligence at all, were channeled immediately into all the science and math courses because the United States was in a race with Russia, as you know, and we were behind. So I was planning to go to the Naval Academy. My dad had worked out a situation with the local congressman to get me an appointment, and I was all ready to go. This is 1959, the spring. Okay, I told you I've been taking clarinet lessons with the local college professor, and the local college was a wonderful music school. They were doing a production of Puccini's La Boheme, the opera. And Mr. Schott called me at home one night. He knew I was a great sight reader. And he said, Don, the second clarinetist in the orchestra has come down with pneumonia. Would you be able to cover that part for the performances? So I said, sure. So I went to the dress rehearsal. I'd never been to an opera. I'd never played in an orchestra. And I was blown away, absolutely blown away. When Mimi and Rodolfo go off stage singing the duet at the end of the first act, and at the end of the 4th act, when Mimi dies and her hand drops beside her chaise lounge and the mouth rolls across the floor, and those bone-chilling brass chords come in, I had tears in my eyes. I went home that night and said to my mom and dad, I want to be a music teacher. They were very understanding. I'm surprised, but they were. And so that's how I got into it. Fast forward, my first college teaching job is Idaho State University. And I'm finishing my doctorate at Iowa, working on my dissertation. And my job included having the marching band. So you were wondering how I got into administration. Well, I worked hard and built the marching band up from about 60 to 160. And the president of the university was a former football coach. He was very impressed by that. And as luck would have it, I was an instructor. And then I got my PhD. So I became an assistant professor. And the chairman of the department had a heart attack. Harold Mealy was his name. And Bud Davis, the president, called me to his office. And he said, Don, I've been watching what you do with the marching band. You get those kids to show up at 6 a.m. in the morning and march around playing the music and making pictures on the field. If you can do that, working with the faculty will be a piece of cake when you be the department chair. And that's how I started. It was serendipity, if you will.
Wow. And that was, so as department chair, what were your responsibilities? And then kind of looking back now, what do you see as some of the important events for you in terms of your development?
You mean as department chair or leading up to that or what?
Yeah, I think as department chair, I mean, obviously you're directing, a big band. You have a lot of responsibilities already. Now you add to those chairing a department. How do you kind of make all those things work together?
Well, being a young person yourself, you'll understand this. You're young and fearless, I guess, and don't know any better. So I was teaching, and I'm not making this up. I had the marching band. I taught two sections of music appreciation with 120 kids in each one. I taught one section of music for the classroom teacher, elementary classroom teacher. And then I taught private lessons to all the woodwind students, flute, clarinet, oboe, bassoon, and saxophone. And so then I became the chair on top of that. Uh, and I did that for 1 year. And then finally they were able to hire someone to take over the band, which helped a lot. But in the meantime, then I began to conduct the university orchestra and also the Idaho Falls Symphony Orchestra. And all I can say is that I didn't know any better. I loved doing what I was doing, and felt blessed to be able to do what I had dreamed of doing. So that's what it was.
So you have one of the things Donnie mentioned earlier, Sputnik, and the impact it had on the American educational system, certainly the federal government, higher education. You mentioned everyone, especially, younger men, are getting really channeled, if you will, into the sciences. So do you have a sense that you're kind of at that as an artist and as a person who is trying to teach the arts, in particular musical instruments, that you were kind of swimming upstream? Did you feel like the arts were kind of being underappreciated, or that you had, kind of to kind of make your own way, if you will?
I think swimming upstream is a good way to say it. In fact, and I'm not complaining at all when I say this, but as I reflect back on the career I was blessed to have, and I think Lucinda alluded to this as well, um, the job of an arts leader is uh, is to make the case, to do everything you possibly can to instill in the general public, and certainly your student, the important role of the arts in our lives and in our culture, in our humanity, if you will. And it's been interesting since my career spanned so many years to see the ways in which we've made advancements in that regard. It hasn't been easy, but I think we're better off in some ways now than we were certainly back in 1968 when I first began teaching at the university level. You do, and again, I maybe shouldn't say this, but Lucinda alluded to it, and I agree with her. About the time you think you're making advances, then two steps forward and five steps backward. For example, when I came to Florida, Florida as a state has the second highest investment of dollars in its cultural programs through the Division of Cultural Affairs of any state in the United States. The only state ahead of us was New York State. In fact, one of my development officers, Peg Richardson, actually served as the director of the Division of Cultural Affairs for a while. And we have lost ground in that regard. In fact, as you probably know, our governor recently vetoed all of the arts funding for the state of Florida, even though I'm sure he knows that for every dollar invested in the arts, it's been documented that you get a return. Usually, I think it's $9 or so for every dollar. So it's a business decision as well as a philosophical one.
Yeah. When you think about Don, you're the leadership that you have contributed to in terms of the arts. Kind of, we've been talking more about, you talk about earlier career in Idaho State and then UF, but I want to make sure that we don't just talk about, the institutions that you have taught in or been a leader in. And you just kind of alluded to taking, some steps forward and some steps backwards. Have you had the chance to kind of think about, I mean, I'm sure you have, this is kind of a setup question. Because again, thinking about the Creative Campus initiative, it seems like the arguments you're making, yeah, sure, they're rooted in an institution because you were teaching, you're an administrator at the University of Florida, but it also seems like you're hinting at broader questions that go far beyond the University of Florida. And I wonder if you could kind of paint us on a larger canvas, to borrow an art metaphor. What is at stake here in terms of whether or not the society understands the importance of the arts? I mean, what really is going on here?
Well, I think that the arts tell us who we are as a civilization, and certainly as who we are as a country within a civilization. And again, I think we've made some progress. I can remember when the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities were created, for example. In fact, Nancy Hanks, who was the head of the National Endowment for the Arts, is one of the people who received, I think, maybe the first honorary doctorate from the College of Fine Arts at the University of Florida. Another thing I would say is that as the arts in society and as the arts, certainly within higher education, have evolved over the years, corresponding developments have been occurring to enhance, support, augment, whatever, those developments outside the institution in the form of professional organization. For me as a musician, I think the most important one is the National Association of Schools of Music. This is one of the oldest academic accrediting institutions in the United States. They clear back to 1924, 100 years ago. And when those men from those institutions came together and began to articulate what the mission should be of university music programs, what the standards for the academic degree should be, et cetera, that began to pave the path. And then as you may know, over the years, there have been sister organizations created for art and design, theater, and dance. And I had the great privilege of working extensively in NASM as a member of the board, as chair of the Commission on Graduate Studies, and as an accreditation reviewer. You were talking about thinking beyond my own personal experiences. When an institution applies for accreditation or re-accreditation, they complete, of course, a self-study. And then a team of evaluators will come to campus to see if the institution is actually doing what it says it's doing. And I had the privilege of doing many of those in many states. And I used to say that I never went to an institution, even the smallest one, where I didn't come away having learned something. In fact, I used to say I would pay NASM for the privilege of doing that. And over the years, those organizations, NASM and the sister ones, have created some incredible position papers, et cetera, that really articulate in an eloquent and thoughtful way what the arts role is in American society, and by extension, education at all levels. Lucinda, and I don't think this came up in her interview, was as involved in the International Society of Fine Arts Deans as I was in NASM. I was in that organization as well on the board, but she was the president. And unfortunately, I don't think she talked about that, because in that position and given the role of that organization, she joined others at the highest level in Washington, D.C., and articulating the importance of the arts to the well-being of the United States. It might be good to have her talk about that sometime. Yeah. To show you how important this is, I had the privilege, I think I mentioned this, of I think 1990, right before I came back here. The Hong Kong Academy for Performing Arts, probably the premier performing arts school in that part of the world, that teaches not only the traditional arts of Asia, but also Western arts, uh, wanted to have a six-person panel to come and evaluate their programs. And I got to represent the United States on that panel. But what that, again, I learned so much. What that did was help me understand, what's happening in other parts of the world as well as in the United States.
You mentioned earlier, Don, that you as a performer, you also transitioned into becoming a teacher. And could you discuss what you think of now as the kind of essential characteristics of being an outstanding teacher, and maybe who you learn those from or how you try to model those?
Well, I think the key word is passion. You have to be passionate about your discipline. In fact, I don't think you can teach it well if you don't love it. And you've got to communicate that love, that passion, and instill that in the students. And I'm talking to both, not only that private lesson with the clarinet major, but also that art appreciation class. And you do it obviously in different ways. In the case of the students who are majoring in the arts, they have to be passionate about it or they're not going to be successful. I used to talk with parents who would come and see me and say, I have a son or daughter who's very talented in the arts, but should I really support and encourage them to pursue this as a major? And I would say, only if they cannot imagine doing anything else without the arts. It has to be that strong a commitment and interest. And then, of course, you have to know your discipline. You have to be a master of that. You have to instill it. I used to think in an art appreciation class or music appreciation, it's a performance, really. That professor up front has to get those students so excited about what he or she is teaching. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And then you have to care deeply about the individual students, of course, be available to them for counseling and guidance and all those kind of things, which you as a successful professor know so well.
Don, I'm going to put you on the spot. Name two or three of those outstanding teachers that you've encountered. Maybe it could be at UF. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for that clarinet professor with whom I studied all those years ago at that former teachers college in Canada. He was a master. He was my role model. He was my mentor. I remember how he taught, how he approached every lesson, how he dressed, his professionalism when we planned recitals together. He's number one. Then there were a couple, at least two, maybe three or four, at the University of Iowa. I don't know what you know about the University of Iowa, but if you look at the history of the evolution of the arts in American higher education, it's right there at the top. Of all places, Iowa City, Iowa. The first Master of Fine Arts degree as a terminal degree in the arts started at the University of Iowa. One of the first, I think it's only the second university level theater program was at the University of Iowa. And the list goes on and on. And I had the good fortune of going there to study. And my major professor there, or one of them, in my Master of Fine Arts degree in performance was Jaime Voxman, probably the premier woodwind pedagogue in the world. And the Faculty School of Music's named for him. And the other one I had was a man who was a music psychologist. And the psychology of music actually started at the University of Iowa as well. And so he was my mentor, guiding me through those studies. And then I think I don't know if you agree or not, but I think we all teach by the way we were taught, especially if we were blessed to have some fantastic teachers. So every time I would go in to play in the symphonic band at the University of Iowa, I would watch the conductor of that ensemble and see how he approached the rehearsal of every one of those pieces. How did he deal with the technical problem? How did he deal with intonation problems? And so on. So in that way, Frederick Ebbs was a mentor for me. Uh, James Dixon was the University Symphony Orchestra conductor there. So when I stood in front of an orchestra in Idaho, I was really, in effect, reaching back in my memory, saying, how would he have done this? And my life been what I've been blessed to be surrounded by those people. And then here at UF, oh my gosh, the colleges have incredible teachers there. But you know, one of the biggest challenges I face here, not so much in Missouri, interestingly, which is also a land grant school, but one of the biggest challenges I faced, even when I came back here in 1990 as dean, was helping the upper administration understand how you appropriately evaluate the work of people in the art. Because they would tend to look at it as a one size fits all, which is primarily the research, study, publication, and so on. And that works for some elements in the arts, like musicology or music history, but it doesn't work for composition or the orchestra conductor or the clarinet professor. And it was quite a journey helping them come to finally understand how you do that appropriately. And I think they're still struggling in some ways, quite frankly.
Now, Don, you're talking about evaluation of College of the Arts faculty, like through, like, say, tenure and promotion, things like that.
Yes.
So how did the University of Florida approach that, back in the day, and what were some of the positive changes that you were able to be part of?
Another gentleman who was, in effect, a mentor for me at Florida was Andrew Sorensen. I don't know if you know that name or not. He was the provost that John Lombardi hired. Andy was had a degree in theology. He had been a trumpet player at the University of Illinois, and he was a humanist at heart. His field of study had to do with sort of the sociology of medical care, if you will. But I said to Andy, I was frustrated, having trouble getting we have people have a unanimous support from their faculty colleagues, glowing letters, external letters. And I would always ask the question when I would solicit those letters, if this person were on your faculty at the University of Illinois, would you tenure him or her, or would you promote him or her? Even though we have all that in a fantastic package, we still have trouble getting it through the university level personnel board. So I asked Andy if I could come over and meet with them personally. And I did, did an education session on them, well, if you will, with the evidence that had been developed over time by NASM and all those organizations, because they had come together and developed position papers on how you do this. And so I would say to them, do you want to be a great university in the truest sense of the word, or do you want to be Purdue? You want to just be an engineering school? If that's it, that's fine. But I don't think that's who the University of Florida is.
Well, one of the things I've noticed over the years too is a strong sense of there's obviously support for, when you think of the Phillips Performance Center, when you think of the Harn Museum, things like that, and interactions between. But what's striking about that, and my wife Sheila and I, we used to volunteer. We were volunteer ushers for many performances, and it was interesting to see the connections that were made between the community, the broader community. Let me rephrase that: the connections that faculty and performers and we're making in the arts and connecting UF to the broader community. But I've been told that that didn't always exist. Um,
Well, would you like for me to talk about that a little bit?
yeah, I mean, how did you help develop that? Because again, you've been to many different universities. I've been to them, and not most universities don't have those connections.
Right. Well, when I came the first time in 1972, 73, I met with the faculty, of course, and we, if I remember correctly, we talked about what our goals ought to be. You know, what is it we need to accomplish here? And on that list was we need to have some graduate degrees. The music department didn't have any graduate degrees in 1973, if you can imagine. We need to have a better performance space. The University Auditorium had not been renovated. We need to have money, more money for scholarships, because talented high school students who are the wonderful violinists or oboists or soprano are actively recruited by universities as their friends who play on the football team. And we didn't have any scholarship help. And then we needed more, as you're talking about, interface with the community, disability, and so on. And so with the help of Frances Rice, she was Wayne Rice's wife, they had just moved back to Gainesville. He had been a Ford Foundation scholar or something in Thailand. They moved into our neighborhood, and we got to know them. Their grandsons were the same age as our boys, so they would come down and play. And Frances had gone to the Cincinnati Conservatory. So, and the word on the street was that we wouldn't have a new music building if it wasn't for Frances Rice, that she convinced Wayne that that was something to be done. So I met with her in the Arredondo room and told her we needed scholarships, but she helped me with that. So we decided to start the Friends of Music group. And that was the first arts support organization at the university and in the community. So that was sort of the first step to begin to build that relationship. Then jump ahead to 1990. I came for the interview here, and the Harn Museum was just about finished. The Performing Arts Center was like a hole in the ground with some structures there. And John Lombardi came at the same time. And so did Larry Tyree. Tyree was the president of Santa Fe College. And we all said, what's going on out there? Lombardi said, what's that hole on the southwest corner of my campus? And Tyree said, why is Santa Fe College building a performing arts center on US campus? And I said, what is that? And they told me what it was. And I got really excited. Fast forward, Lombardi and Tyree negotiated. It went on for a while, and Tyree agreed to give the building to the University of Florida because they weren't prepared to manage it. I said that I wanted it to be part of the College of Fine Arts. I didn't want it to be sitting over there somewhere because I could see all kinds of opportunities for interaction with our students and faculty and so on. And Lombardi and Sorensen agreed. Now, the Harn Museum was new at the time, and the founding director was a gentleman named Bud Bishop, who had done a fabulous job of building that program. He could report directly to the provost, and he didn't want to change that. So, although Lombardi and Sorensen wanted the Harn to be part of the college, it just wasn't possible. And David Coffin, who funded it, wasn't interested either. But the Performing Arts Center was. And I said, before I take this on, we need to bring a consultant in to be sure this is the right thing to do. And we brought a man from the University of Illinois who was in charge of the Krannert Center, probably the most successful one of its type at the time. And he came and said, yes, it needs to be part of the College of Fine Arts. And so that's how it all came about. We hired, after we got the endowment gift, a man named Michael Blatchley, who you may have met, who was the executive director. I had been the executive director for 10 years. He came in 2000 from UCLA. We recruited him from UCLA. He did a fabulous job, but Michael also wanted to report directly to the provost. So he continued to report to me until I stepped down. Then he played a card and got that recording mechanism changed. But I mean, the University of Iowa, I mentioned, has a fabulous center. We're just blessed to have them. The main thing is that they need to be an integral part of the life of the university, looking inward and outward, not just outward, if you will.
Yeah. How did you go about it, especially in the early days, as you're really building a first-rate college, but again, realizing it wasn't always that way, right? So what kind of pitch did you have to make? You talked earlier about the importance of having, exceptional instructors. How did you go about recruiting, top-rate people, faculty, staff, board members, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a very good question. And Lucinda talked at some length about this, so I won't say too much, except that it's always been a challenge here, and maybe to some extent in other places, but not as much as here, to have enough financial resources to really achieve the levels of excellence that you want and that the University of Florida should have in its arts program. I entitle our timeline for the story Lucinda and I are doing about the college's history. I pick up on the motto of the state that I grew up in, ad astra per astra, to the stars through difficulty. And that may sound a little melodramatic, but that's sort of the story of the arts here. It's been a real struggle. And part of that is rooted in the history of the institution as a land-grant institution. But it's taken the University of Florida a lot longer to get over the self-imposed restrictions that suggest than it has at other comparable institutions. And I would also say, I don't know of one, speaking of my discipline, one world-class American university music program that doesn't exist in large measure because the person at the top, the president or the chancellor, says, I want it. I don't expect you to justify it on student credit hour production or any of these other things. I want it. I want it to be a defining characteristic of this institution. And I was fortunate to have some of that when John was the president. And I think we've had it sort of off and on over the many years. But you really have to have that commitment from the top, because from that then begins to flow the resources you need. And in terms of recruiting the faculty, I think they want, at least one of the things that drew me here is you want to be part of building something. That's exciting, not just to hold on to what's been true in the past, but to really be part of something exciting. For example, when we started the Center for World Arts, and we brought in Joan Frosch, I don't know if you've ever met her, a dance professor from the University of Maryland, and Wilson Tremura, an incredible Brazilian music guitarist, and Larry Cook, an ethnomusicologist. They sort of began to feed off of each other as they built that program into really a wonderful program. When we started the Center for the Arts in Medicine, the same thing happened, but people wanted to be part of something that was new and exciting. And it's exciting to be at Florida, University of Florida, because this institution, I think, is still in the process of becoming. If I had gone back to Iowa, which actually I could have as head of the music school there, the challenge would have been to hold on to what had already been accomplished there. The challenge here is to see what you can become. And it's been my experience anyway, in hiring some of the brilliant young faculty I was privileged to hire, that they bought into that. They love being part of that.
What were some of the Now, you've already alluded to some of these, Don, you talked about the importance of having leadership at the top. You've talked about what makes an outstanding instructor, the importance of passion. Um, in your experience at the University of Florida, and then you talked about the challenges, the land grant, the emphasis on, certain things, obviously engineering, agriculture, et cetera. Those are integral to any outstanding land grant institution. But what have been some of the turning points uh, that you participated in uh, that helped bring the arts, that helped kind of uplift the arts and demonstrate to the whole community, the whole campus community, perhaps, that, hey, the arts are really a centerpiece or should be a centerpiece of what this university does. What were some of those turning points?
Well, shortly after I came to be dean in 1990, I met with the faculty and said I wanted to chart the path forward with them. We called it Progress Toward Excellence. And I wanted to work with them to define some strategic moves in that regard. And we identified 4 or 5 thrusts. And they needed to align with the university's priorities. It doesn't make any sense to have your priorities here if they don't fit at all with what the institution is trying to do. The institution really wanted to grow its graduate program, so that became one of ours. And we can talk later about the struggle that's been, but we were going to emphasize and grow our graduate program. New degrees, recruiting more students, more grad assistantship. The arts and technology. This is 1990. We already could see where it was going, and I wanted us to be a leader in that regard. International programs. The University of Florida at that point said we needed to internationalize our campus. We had virtually nothing going on in the international arena, so that became a thrust. Diversity was another one. And I meant across the board. The diversity of our student body, the diversity of our faculty, the diversity of our program offerings, academically and performance-wise and exhibition, and interdisciplinary programs. And this kind of comes to where you are. So I said, what if we align as many of our programs as we can with the historic strengths of the university? Let's look at engineering. Where is it possible to do an interface there? And out of that conversation came the Digital Worlds Institute. And there's a kind of an interesting story about that journey. But the bottom line is it's internationally recognized. And an interesting sidebar, Paul, you'll chuckle at this, I think. I was sure, and everybody else was, that we would hire a computer engineer to head that up. But you know who we ended up with? James Oliverio, who was an Emmy Award composer at Georgia Tech University. Then we said, okay, who else can we align ourselves up with? Well, how about medicine? Well, and we ended up with the Center for the Arts in Medicine, which is internationally recognized. There was a gentleman at the medical school named John Graham Pohl. John was a pediatric oncologist, if you can imagine. I don't know if you're a fan of Robin Williams or not, but Robin was the star of a movie called Patch Adams.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
So John Graham Pohl was the Patch Adams of the Shands Hospital,
Okay.
wearing the clown's nose and the funny hat. I mean, you'd have to do that. I'm getting a chill when you're working with children who have cancer. But John was passionate about that, and we put with him several other young, brilliant faculty from the arts, and then it just took off. So in a nutshell, without belaboring it, that's kind of how we proceeded in that regard.
How did you, as a leader of the institution, and at a certain point, we realized that, endowments, fundraising, names on the building, when you go to the Phillips Center, in the faculty, the gallery and different things, you always see names. A lot of people don't realize how that happens. Can you talk about that aspect? I guess it's, in terms of development, but it's more than just development. It's part of your whole the whole overarching strategy.
Well, I'm sorry, did I interrupt? I'm sorry. No, I think I realized early on, as most people in the arts did, that the excellence we were seeking would never be found in state funding alone. Even if we got additional resources from the universities, that excellence, that margin of excellence, if you will, would only be found in those non-state dollars. So when I came to be interviewed, that was one of the first questions I asked was, what development staff does the college have? At that point, they had a 1/3 time person that was shared with the College of Education and the libraries. And I said I would not come unless the college had a full-time development director. Because if you don't have the staff, you're not going to be successful. In a way, well, fundraising at UF is a very successful enterprise, as you know. UF Foundation is wonderful, and its relationship with the university is, in my opinion, the way it should be. It's not always that way at other institutions. But it's hard work because I don't know if you know how it works or not, but they have an incredible donor base. And every college, in effect, owns, quote unquote, those prospects. And so we would have the experience of finding someone who was interested in us and what we were proposing, but we would have to clear that person with the foundation, and they might tell us, oh, they already belong to business, or most often they already belong to athletics. So that was that was sort of the initial challenge. But that aside, although it's a lot of hard work, the arts are an easy sell because people love them. And oftentimes a graduate, an alumnus on memories of the university isn't the program where they got their degree, it's playing in the band or having been in a Florida play or production or singing in the men's glee club. So once we could get permission to talk to somebody, we could usually get them to be supportive. And we've done pretty well. You know, that we have the Steinbrenner Band Building, which has an interesting story. We have the McGuire Pavilion, the Theater and Dance, the Phillips Center, and they all have wonderful stories about the donors. It really is a very interesting process.
Have you experimented, Donna, during your time as dean with advisory boards or kind of, things of that nature?
In what sense, Paul? You mean advising for the college?
Yeah, when I arrived at UF, I remember, I was always, as you know, kind of a halftime administrator and history prof, but we were always the incoming cohort that I was a part of in 2008 were encouraged to develop, boards of advisors for our centers and
Right.
such. Was that something that you did?
Well, it was sort of a multi-pronged process. I mentioned the Friends of Music early on, and it started almost, 50 years ago. But then we formed a sister organization in the visual arts and in theater and dance. And each of those has its own advisory board. So there are those links. For a while, I don't know if we still do or not, we had a similar board for the university galleries, that's plural. At the university gallery, when the Harn came online, I was told as the dean, we're going to turn the university gallery into classrooms. And I protested, and they said, well, you can keep it as a gallery so long as it doesn't get any publicity for about 4 or 5 years, because they wanted the Harn to shine. I understood that. But now that program has expanded to include multiple galleries. There's the one in Bridger Hall, there's a couple in the Fine Arts Building. And those galleries have I think, still have an advisory board. The Gator Band has an advisory alumni group. And Lucinda had, I think, I didn't have it, a council that's made up, I think, of the heads of each one of those, and maybe some major donors as well. I'm not really sure.
During your time as dean, Don, you added a number of academic programs, and I'm not going to ask you to kind of list all of those, but I wonder if you could tell me what you see as some of the most important kind of new academic programs that you were able to facilitate into existence, and why they were important to the college and to the university.
Well, in the abstract, or as an overarching idea, I've already mentioned that when I came back in 1990, one of the university's thrusts was its graduate programs. And if we were going to be a player, if we were going to be at the table, so to speak, then the fine arts had to have its graduate programs as well. And it's been a bit of a struggle. I'll go way back in time. It's 1972. I think I already mentioned that the music department didn't have any graduate programs at all. The faculty said this has to be one of our top priorities, so I took it on. And I thought it would be, not difficult. My guys' teachers' colleges had master's degrees in music education in those days. Here we were at the University of Florida. So I worked with Bob Bryan, who was in the provost's office at the time. I put together, with the faculty's help, a proposal that would meet NASM standards for a master's degree in music education. It went over to Tallahassee to be reviewed by whatever the clearinghouse was over there. And I was called to make the presentation. I can close my eyes, it's like it was yesterday. I went over there. had only been here about 6 months, and the dean of the School of Music at FSU fought us tooth and nail. Wiley Housewright was his name, and he practically crawled up on the table to protest, saying to the committee, each university in this state has its mission, and the music program at FSU is one of its shining stars. You must not do anything to diminish that focus. And they agreed with him. And so came back, and we decided, with Bob Bryan's endorsement, that we would create a Master of Fine Arts degree in music, because FSU did not have one. And so that's how we got our foot in the door. And then from then on, it wasn't quite as hard. We created a PhD in music and in music education, a Bachelor of Fine Arts in dance, and at the New World School of the Arts, which you might want to talk about, a Master of Arts in Museum Studies, which is wonderful because we have the resources of the Horn and the Natural History Museum and all the galleries, a PhD in art history, and then a BA and MA in digital arts and sciences. So those were all the new degrees.
You mentioned digital arts, and could we kind of focus in on that for a moment? And again, there was a time when people thought of the kind of the digital world as separate from arts. Obviously now we know that's not true, but how were you able to kind of bring those things together at the inception?
That's a very interesting question. As I've already mentioned, one of our strategies was to partner with other programs. Of course, engineering is the crown jewel of Florida, I think. And so I met with that dean, and we had the provost's office involved, and we decided to come up with this joint program. But the resistance came, surprisingly, from my arts faculty, picking up on what you meant, because digital arts wasn't real art. In fact, those artists were kind of of the opinion that if art had a commercial value, it couldn't be real art, if you will. So that was, it took a while to work through that. And then we also had opposition from computer engineering in that college because they wanted it by themselves. They didn't want to have the art piece over there. And Wim Phillips was over in the research office at the time, and he told me, just forget them. Don't bother, don't waste your time working with them. You go ahead and do the digital arts program by yourself, that is, say, by your college, and we'll bring them along later. And that's what happened. But it's only in recent years I would suggest to you that the fine arts people, the real artists, if you will, have said, oh yeah, this is okay. We're part of it now.
Okay. Well, actually, this is kind of leading up to a question. I love asking university leaders at no matter what university I'm talking to people at. I've lived this particular struggle. How were you able to? And I remember talk about Win Phillips, and I have a lot of fond memories. I served with Win on the President Fox's goals. What was it called? University Goals Task Force.
Wonderful.
Actually, with Lucinda, remember, it was on that too.
Right.
Dave Richardson, and it was so educational for me. And I remember one of the constant refrains was how difficult it was to get different units at the campus to collaborate with each other. And so how do and I mean, we complained about this 10 years ago, but obviously my suspicion it was even tougher 30 40 years earlier. So I mean, how did you make this pitch? I mean, there are only so many Win Phillipses on the campus who can kind of
it was a challenge, as you've articulated. When I think back 20 years, or it's been a long time now, I think part of it had to do with the message that the new deans received, or that all the deans received in 1990 from John Lombardi and Andrew Sorensen. They were talking about silos, academic silos, back then when I hadn't heard anyone else talking about it. And we had, as I recall, it was a major economic downturn, like at the beginning of 1991 or so. And they came to us and said, the only way we're going to get through this and maintain the excellence that we want is if we work together. And all the deans, I think, understood that. And then I had the experience of when I would go to Tigard Hall with my hat in hand asking for money, that if I was coming to propose an interdisciplinary program, no one ever said no to me. That I could get money for those endeavors when I couldn't get them for anything else. My faculty understood that, and I think the message was getting out to the other academic institutions on campus as well. And it was really pretty exciting. But as you say, you have to have it from the top. You mentioned Wim. One of my favorite memories of him is we were trying to get the Center for the Arts and Medicine off the ground. And we were making some progress, but we needed some money. So I went to Win and I told him what our vision was. And I said, but we need some help. And I told him how much. And he said, oh, hell, Don. The medical school has more money than that on the floor at the end of a business day. I'm going to make a phone call. You'll be all right. And a day or two later, we had the money.
That's a great story. Yeah, I miss Win. He would check in. The last thing we did together, we were on the task force on African and Native American history, and but even after we concluded that, we check in every once in a while, with each other, and he was really just one of a kind.
He was wonderful. And talking about partnerships, I failed to mention two of our most important ones that I think was collaboration with the Center for Latin American Studies and the Center for African Studies, because they, again, were two great strengths of the university even back then. And of course, the possibilities are endless. And they loved that. They just embraced us, and we did all kinds of wonderful things together.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Don, because yeah, that occurs to me now because over the years, I mean, I saw and I had students involved in performances, through both of those centers in collaboration with College of the Arts. I didn't even think about that.
Mhm. Well, they and the directors, I don't know that I can recall the names, but they were quick to embrace us. And then some of the faculty, like I mentioned, like Wilson Tamura and the others, they just reveled in this. It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And it helped us with the whole diversity goal, you know.
Yeah.
And we could probably talk at length about how do you recruit minority faculty. I hate to use that word, but you have to let them know that they're not going to be alone. That if they come to Gainesville, there are going to be other colleagues who embrace the same goals, embody the same challenges and experiences. That's how you do it, in my opinion.
Well, and I think that, and also the types of performances that, and again, I'm just thinking of like, performing arts, and it's become such a fun and also kind of marquee event to see both of the centers you mentioned, African Studies, Latin American Studies, have participated in sponsoring or co-sponsoring performances in the region, right? And they're kind of become ambassadors. I think that's a term, we talked about with Lucinda, the arts as ambassadors.
Absolutely. And the arts are uniquely positioned to do that. I mean, people simply respond to them. There's something about who we are as human beings that that it, embraces that experience or those experiences. And I think I ought to give a shout out to U.S. student government here too. One of the major milestones in the evolution of the Phillips Center was when we got student government to agree to underwrite the cost of tickets for students. So now, if I remember correctly, if you look at the cost, there will be a student cost down here because it's being subsidized in part by the student government.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very important.
In fact, if I could go just one more thing about that, if you go back far enough in time, when I had came here the first time, and even when I came back, I would have to go to student government to beg for money so that the theater program would have plays for the band, for everything. And one of our big accomplishments a couple of years after I came as dean was to get the central administration to finally begin to fund those activities instead of having to beg student government to do so.
That's a major accomplishment. Don, you alluded earlier to, kind of taking 2 steps forward, 3 steps backwards, or 3 steps forward, whatever the case may be. And you also, alluded to a recent crisis in a sense that Dean Lavelle also referred to, that it was the state of Florida made a major cut in arts funding. I was just kind of somehow, the way my mind works, it's so chaotic. There's a new book that's out on the Scopes monkey trial. I've read a review. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but it sounds like a pretty good book. It's a revisionist history of that trial and, some of the Titanic personalities involved, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, et cetera, et cetera. But the arts seem to be at the center now in a way that, science, people forget about this, but, science has also been at the center of a lot of controversy, but arts, I mean, who would have thought in 2024 that art seems to be at the center of this?
Well, we have a center in the college, or at least it was there when I came, called the Center for the Arts and Public Policy. And there was an art professor named John O'Connor who started that. He worked very closely with Roy Hunt, who I'm sure you know from the law school. And one of the first things they were looking at was what you're alluding to now that was going on way back then. That you remember the Maplethorpe situation?
Oh, yeah.
There was an exhibit, it's a long time ago, there was an exhibition at the Baltimore, I think, Art Museum of photographs by Maplethorpe that were homoerotic or whatever, and there was this huge public outcry against that, and they were threatening to close the museum down. And anyway, the Center for the Arts and Public Policy was established at that point to try to understand, help people understand that kind of dynamic, which was happening everywhere. And when I stepped down as dean in 2005, and after a sabbatical, I came back and taught graduate programs, but I also served as director of that center. And at that point, actually, all that censorship stuff had kind of quieted it down. It was just, I don't want to say it was behind us, but it wasn't front stage center. And so I was more interested in cultural diplomacy, using the arts as a way to improve international relations. And I brought a man named Joseph Nye to campus. He's the guy who coined the phrase soft power. And he came and did a presentation that was co-sponsored by the Graham Center, which is just open. And then after I left, that center was sort of absorbed into a new one that they have over in college now. But I don't think they're doing anything with cultural diplomacy. But here we are again now with the whole censorship stuff. I'm told, and I don't know this for a fact, that the governor decided to do this because he or some of his staff were upset with the way some of the state arts money was being used. And I don't know if that's true, but that's been an argument over the years. So the bottom line is it's caused havoc and it's done damage to many programs.
Yeah. Are there lessons of the past, Don, or lessons from your career, or the struggles that you and your peers had to build the arts? There are lessons that we can learn from now in terms of saying, hey, we really need to be supportive. We need to, to think about building the arts, not taking a knife to it.
Well, I kind of think back on things. I think people want to give money to things that are successful. If you go hand in hand with an "oh, woe is me," it's not going to work usually. But if you can get a potential donor caught up in your passion, your collective passion, and what the vision is, for example, arts and medicine, you will be successful. That's number one. The second is that the level of excellence or the margin of excellence that we seek for the arts will never be found in state funding alone. Number three is great arts programs and universities, great ones like this one, exist, I hate to use the word only, but certainly in very large measure if the administrators at the top share that vision and want it for the overall health and excellence of the institution. And then I do believe, passionately I have since I was in college, in the ability of the arts to be cultural ambassadors for culture, for worldwide understanding. I think, didn't President Biden just put out some kind of a statement this past year, kind of echoing that? In other words, from the president's office in Washington, saying, I want to elevate the role of the arts in our society because of the potential for doing good. I think I'm remembering correctly about that.
Yeah, and I think he talked about the role of arts in democracy, in
right.
Promoting these ideas of, and yeah, it seems like these ideas though are constantly under siege. Especially recently, I was on a panel and I one of my fellow panelists, very sharply reminded me, which I've heard my entire life. I mean, I think he thought it was something new. You know, Professor Ortiz, this is not a democracy. This is a constitutional republic.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I said, well, yeah, I'm very familiar with the distinctions, but we strive, towards, kind of, freedom, expression, liberty, and such. But it's interesting, and I think, Lucinda referred to this also. We had a discussion maybe during the interview or after about the connections between arts and humanities, and I'm frequently now asked to talk. And in part, I picked Toni Morrison's A Mercy for the ILR audience a couple of weeks ago because that is one of the books that has been frequently the target of bans because it's a very tough kind of book about American colonial history. Things weren't all roses back then. And I never thought at this point I'd have to make the argument about why it's important to read something like that. But I think we should be able to argue, as you're saying, if I understand you correctly, we should be able to make the case that what we do really matters and that sometimes it's going to ruffle people's feathers.
Absolutely.
But that's a necessary part of building the society that we want to live in, right?
Why shouldn't we be as passionate about our point of view as other people are about theirs? Thankfully, we have some external resources nowadays that we didn't have before. For example, there's an incredible organization called Americans for the Arts that are an advocacy group. And if you were to Google that, you would find the resources that they have available. I can remember, for example, when the National Endowment for the Arts budget, total budget, was less than the budget of the military bands. And as you well know, the two endowments, depending on which political party is in power, they're always at risk. National Public Radio is at risk. This is just the society we live in. And as standard bearers in the arts and humanities, we have to be out there leading the way and fighting the good fight, as I say.
Exactly. Well, Don, I've learned so much from listening to you and reading the materials that you and Lucinda gave to us, and but I'm also cognizant of the fact that we've been here for well over an hour now, and so I want to thank you, but also before we kind of wrap up, if there are other themes or topics or things you want us to talk about, what are those things?
Well, I think you've done a wonderful job kind of steering the conversation, given all the dimensions here. I just feel blessed, as I've said, I think, to have had the privilege of having the career I've had. And although it's been a fight, if you will, upstream, whatever we want to say, I've worked with some of the best people you can imagine. Faculty, colleagues, students, administrators, people who have been patient with me. When I came here to be chairman of the music department, I came as an untenured assistant professor. I was 30 years old. And Reed Poole, who was a full professor who had been the chair, took me under his wings. And Richard Bowles, who was the director of bands, who was old enough to be my father, took me under his wings. And they guided me and helped me be successful. And I have had that at every step of the way. And I couldn't be more grateful. I really couldn't.
Excellent. Well, Don, I'm just very grateful for your leadership and your vision and your passion and the difference you've made in the lives of just thousands and thousands of students and so many people. And I'm just excited to be able to finally get to talk with you really one-on-one.